Continuing our conversation about tomorrow's primary elections. Joining me now to talk about this year's primary season and what it will mean for the Democratic Party is Mayor Katz. He served as a campaign strategist for Mayor Mamdani. He has also spent time advising other candidates in the city, including Brad Lander, Micah Lasher, and Claire Valdez. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
The conventional wisdom is that tomorrow will be a referendum on Mayor Mamdani's influence and whether or not it extends to other candidates not named Zohran Mamdani. Is that a fair reading of the races?
Look, I think that tomorrow is a referendum on the future of the Democratic Party. And it's a referendum on what kind of a politics people want to see in this city. And I think in Claire Valdez, in Brad Lander, in Daria Lisa, in the mayor's slate, you have candidates who embody a politics similar to the one he embodied that, a year ago we sat here that shocked the nation. I think what we saw that last June was a hunger for a politics that turned the page on a politics beholden to big money and small ideas. And people wanted ambition, people wanted change, people wanted a new generation of leaders. That's on the ballot again. And I think people are still hungry for those things and are ready to take a chance on a government they can believe in again.
Okay, so let's test that. When we talked about how Mamdani unexpectedly won last year, you said one of the keys was a clear, easily repeatable set of promises that were relevant, right? So fast and free buses, freeze the rent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Unlike the mayor, though, who can actually do something about 2 or 3 different things, or at least promise to credibly, members of Congress, it's really done at the conference level, not the individual member. And, I moderated a bunch of these debates. The promises were kind of all over the place, but none of them were as direct as, I will freeze your rent. What kind of a challenge is that for you as the person doing the messaging for them?
Well, I think one of the things I give voters a lot of credit for knowing the difference between federal offices and executive offices, and knowing that an executive has the ability to deliver on specific sets of promises in a way that one member of Congress doesn't. But I think part of what's so exciting about this slate of Brad, Claire, and Dari is these are candidates who will be so much more than just one vote in Congress. They're not just going to vote the right way. They're going to be leading voices on these issues, whether that's standing up to bad landlords, abolishing ICE, protecting democracy, getting dark money out of politics. These are people who've all in their own ways proven they're willing to put their bodies on the line when it comes to ICE being in New York City. They're willing to meet with every single person who is a victim of an affordability crisis. They're willing to kind of expand out of the traditional role of what we've seen politicians be when they're kind of just standing by, watching something unfold, maybe issuing a press release or showing up when it's election season, but not every single day using every tool at their disposal to change things. And so I think they've run campaigns on those issues, on taking on ICE, on addressing the affordability crisis through federal action that really speak to that and speak to that ambition and speak to a different kind of politics.
So obviously there are incumbents who would take great issue with the idea that they've been standing around kind of watching things unfold, and that they've done what they could. They're in the minority. There are limits, and one needs to be realistic about what those limits are. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is that somebody gets elected, if they're, let's say it was now and not November, if they're in the minority, and they're only part of a conference and they're not in the leadership because they're a backbencher, they're a freshman, realistically, how much can they actually do?
I kind of reject a little bit of the premise there, Errol, in the sense of I think I take great issue, and I think their constituents take great issue with seeing someone like Congressman Espaillat take millions of dollars from AIPAC donors and cast votes to send taxpayer dollars that could be going to Upper Manhattan, that could be going to the Bronx, and instead sending it to Netanyahu to continue to bomb children in Gaza. I think there are a lot of people in Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn who take issue with Dan Goldman accepting money from corporations, from corporate PACs, from AIPAC, and casting those same votes, casting votes to expand ICE's authority of surveillance, similar to how Congressman Espaillat voted to continue to give $8 billion to ICE long after it was clear what was occurring. And so I think those are things that are actual votes they took. And then you contrast that with the records of the other candidates in this race.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, look, the ICE funding, some of this came out during the debates. I mean, you're talking about, he sent $8 billion to ICE, part of a much bigger package that included
but there were Democrats who
money
fought to oppose
for women and children to get
Yes.
prenatal services and food and everything else. If you're saying the candidates you're supporting are never going to vote for that, I'd like to see that.
No, what I'm saying is the candidates I'm supporting, I think there's a kind of conventional wisdom that's accepted from status quo politicians that inherently you have to compromise. And I think anyone knows that you're never going to get everything you want. in a deal. What I find, and I think what voters find frustrating, is this belief that compromise must come on the backs of working people, that compromise must come in the form of furthering investing in Trump's masked bandits. That, I think there are certain places we can draw a line and we can use the power that we have that elected officials have to stop that. And I think what you're going to see tomorrow is a referendum on just how frustrated are people with politics as usual.
How do you stop that? You are presented as a member of Congress with an omnibus bill, right? It includes money to feed hungry children in your district, pregnant women in your district, SNAP benefits and everything else, and there's funding for ICE that you cannot stop, that you don't have the votes to stop. Your conference doesn't have the votes to stop. Your leadership has already told you don't have the votes to stop. What is this new member going to do?
I mean, I think there are multiple things that can draw attention to an issue that can change votes. That's something we've seen repeatedly. And so whether it's actions like what Brad Lander did last year, getting arrested, putting his body on the line, Daria Liza similarly has taken similar actions. I think those are actions that drive media attention and coverage that change the political realities for members. I also think that there is an often built-in consensus that, well, we're not going to get what we need in the budget, so we don't have the votes to organize. So we're not even going to try to peel off a few Republicans in vulnerable districts. So we're not going to ask Democrats in competitive districts to take these votes because we're buying some myth that it's unpopular. We need people in Washington who are going to shake up and challenge that mentality to see different results.
Okay. You mentioned funding from AIPAC, which I know is like a buzzword and something that all of the candidates you're supporting and many other candidates go to again and again and again. You're not saying that funding or involvement through or by AIPAC is illegal, right? But you're saying it's some sort of marker that this candidate is completely unacceptable?
No, look, I think that when you were, it's up to the voters to decide what's acceptable and unacceptable. What I'd say is I think that...
I mean, but you're the message guy, and you made sure to put that message out.
I think that when you're seeing an issue that is as unpopular as taxpayer dollars funding wars half a world away while we struggle with our own affordability crisis in the city, continuing to vote in that way, continuing to fund those wars, the vote does not make sense and is not forgivable right now. I think the reason that happens is because AIPAC spends millions and millions of dollars on elections buying the votes and the influence over politicians who are willing to sell out their districts.
Something I've noticed in New York 13 and New York 7, some lower level races as well, is that there are progressive candidates backed by the DSA in most cases. They look for communities of color where there's kind of low voter turnout. They come in often with outside money from the Justice Democrats or somewhere else. They run an aggressive door-knocking campaign. And, like I understand that's like all's fair in politics. Nobody's breaking the law or anything like that. But they are in some ways displacing or at least disregarding older political structures that were there, that were based on, ethnic affiliations, old line voting patterns, old line voting machines, tenant associations, and so forth. It's legal, and like I said, all's fair. But is it progressive?
Look, I think that what you're seeing in rhetoric out of both, frankly, the SBOT campaign and the Reynoso campaign is an attempt to turn the tenant, and the mayor talks about this in his speech on Thursday night, an attempt to turn a tenant of 40 years on the tenant of 1 year, an attempt to kind of divide off of age and off of race and off of religion who has a right to this district, who has a right to representation in this district. And I think that is not what's going to drive our city forward. And I think the way that the mayor put it is that, the question that New Yorkers are facing right now is not when did you arrive, but can you afford to stay? And I think what these candidates, Claire and Dari and Brad, have in common is a shared belief that there's an affordability crisis that is impacting someone who moved here a year ago or 2 years ago, and it's impacting people who lived here for 50 years and just want to stay in the only community they've known, and are going to meet that and build a new coalition similar to the one the mayor built last November.
I got to ask before I let you go, you made national headlines. You're an advisor involved in the campaign of Graham Plattner, high-profile Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate up in Maine, where we're on the air, by the way. They get New York 1 up there. But this is a guy, he had a tattoo associated with Nazis. He had an online dating profile well after he was married. A lot of what we would call political baggage. Was that known before? Does that matter? Or was this a matter of, look, he's the best candidate, and we'll take him baggage and all, and we think we can win?
From day one of the campaign, Graham's run talking about being someone who never thought he would run for office, who lived a life up to that point the way someone would live a life not knowing they were going to run for office. And what that included is, he served 4 tours in the Middle East. He came back. He struggled with PTSD. He struggled with drinking, with depression, had a dark period on the internet, like so many young men, particularly who return home from war. And he's run a campaign being entirely open and honest about that. And the way he talks about it that I think resonates, and that I certainly believe in, is if you believe that politics can change, if you believe we can change someone's votes, if we can change our government, then you have to believe inherently in a person's ability to change. And I believe in that, and I think Rams told a story across Maine that's resonated in that way.
Okay. There's some odd variables going on, in particular rain I'm thinking of. What are the strategists thinking? How's that going to affect turnout tomorrow, do you think?
I think people are going to be really excited across our city to show up and vote for an incredible slate of candidates to usher in more leaders like the mayor, who are going to fight against an affordability crisis and who are going to deliver for the city.
If the voters decide different, is this a matter of the voters being wrong or what?
The voters are never wrong, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. We agree on that for sure. Maurice Katz, thanks so much for coming by. Best of luck tomorrow.